InvestorIdeas.com podcast.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com Podcasts. Today's podcast is sponsored by Cannabis Swiss Corporation, trading on the OTC as CSUI, fully licensed cannabis cultivation and distribution company in Switzerland for recreational tobacco products and medical CBD oils. In today's podcast, we look at a few public and private company announcements from Meta Growth Corp, trading on the TSXV Venture as Meta, as well as HITI Incorporated, trading on the CSE as HITI and the OTCQB as HITIF. Also looking at China Infrastructure Construction Corporation, trading on the OTC as CHNC, as well as Icanic Farms Incorporated. And at the end, I'll also be looking at two recent research reports that came out from the Mental Health Commission of Canada, as well as a research report from a graduate researcher at the University of Victoria. So first, starting with Meta Growth Corporation, as well as High Tide Incorporated, who announced that at the special meetings of shareholders of Meta held yesterday, the shareholders of Meta voted in favor of a special resolution to approve the previously announced proposed business combination, pursuant to which High Tide will acquire all of the issued and outstanding common shares of Meta by way of the plan of arrangement under the Business Corporations Act, and as further described in the joint news releases issued by Meta and High Tide on August 21st of this year. And the arrangement required approval by 66% of the votes cast by Meta shareholders present in person and represented by proxy at the meeting. Now, this arrangement will create Canada's largest cannabis retail with a 1,481 million in annualized revenue, an annual cost of operation synergies of approximately 8 million to 9 million, and a strong balance sheet to support growth. Now, a total of 102 million Meta shares, representing approximately 43.1% of the outstanding Meta shares, were represented in person or by proxy in the meeting, and of the votes cast with respect to the arrangement, an aggregate of 102 million Meta shares were voted in favor of the arrangement, representing approximately 99% of the votes cast on the resolution approving the arrangement. Now, it's expected that Meta will apply for a final order with the Court of Queen's Bench of Alberta in respect to the arrangement on October 28th, and completion of the arrangement remains subject to receipt of the required regulatory and court approvals and other customary closing conditions, which are set out in the arrangement agreement between Meta and High Tide dated August 20th. A copy of which can be found at their CDAR profiles at cdar.com. So Meta Growth and High Tide, it looks very inevitable now that acquisition is going to be happening, with High Tide acquiring the majority of Meta Growth. As far as creating the Canada's biggest retailer, there is a little bit of mislead there when you look at the geographic locations of a lot of the retail stores. While they do have a large amount of retail locations and they do have a pretty significant infrastructure for their retail systems, they are mainly based in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Now, in those provinces, less population density, as well as pretty heavy competition from other retailers. There's a massive amount of licenses that were granted within those provinces, which I've discussed many times. So when you compare their overall sort of population control, where you're looking at what retail areas they're in, there's a lot of competitors that maybe have better geographic locations and more population density areas that they're serving. So I wouldn't say that they really will be Canada's largest retailer, except for on paper. And I think that the reality of that, they'll still have to do a lot of expansion more into BC, Ontario, Quebec, and the more population dense provinces, as well as change some of their styles to some of their retail stores. Not saying that they're not quite up to par, but there's definitely room for improvement based on the sort of new reality that COVID has created for how retail should be handled. They don't have the most robust online system, as well as their delivery and curbside pickup still needs to be a little bit more built out. So definitely going to be something that'll impact the retail industry within Canada, and I do expect this acquisition to go through. It does seem like it's going to. So definitely something to look forward to over the next coming months. Next, looking at Icanic Farms Incorporated, who announced that its wholly owned CBD-focused subsidiary, Icanic Life, has expanded into action sports family with the addition of the snowboarding phenom, Toby Miller. We're excited to welcome Toby to the Icanic family and to participate in his athletic progression. Toby's love for snowboarding is contagious, and his unique approach to competing in the half-pipe makes him a global fan favorite, said Brian Baca, the CEO of Icanic Farms. Now, Toby kicked off his professional career by winning the USASA Nationals title and major sponsors by the age of 13, and his career trajectory has continued to over the years, with 2018 being a breakout season for Miller as he exploded onto the pro scene and made a statement by owning 3 podiums in major halfpipe competitions. Last season, Toby stole the show at the X Games in Aspen, Colorado, and won bronze medals in the men's snowboarding halfpipe event. Now, Toby is focusing on the 2022 Olympic Games in China with an intense training regimen that is preparing him both mentally and physically to be a leader in his first of many Winter Olympics. And he trains with Iconic Farms board members as U.S. snowboarding coach J.J. Thomas alongside Sean White. And Toby and Sean have been riding together since he was 13 years old, and now they will be pursuing each other as they each try to earn a spot on the U.S. Olympic halfpipe team this season. I'm grateful to have partnered up with Iconic Life CBD to help maintain longevity in the sport I love, said Miller. Focusing on personal care and training is my top priority. So, Iconic Farms getting snowboard sponsorship or snowboard representative for their CBD products. We've kind of seen this drop off over the last year where obviously because the sports seasons have been so heavily impacted due to COVID, you've seen the sort of combination of athletes jumping into the CBD space disappear a little bit. Obviously, that's picking up again, and I would hope to see more athletic groups working together with some sort of CBD-based company when it comes to overall fitness and healing. Again, there's tons of athletes that do swear by CBD today, and hopefully moving forward, I think many of the different leagues in the US as well as globally will start accepting CBD as a natural health additive for athletes to use, but still isn't fully endorsed within all leagues. It is interesting to note that now obviously the Olympics does not have an issue with CBD products, and hopefully that translates over into all the other athletic divisions moving forward. Looking next at China Infrastructure Construction Corporation, who announced its merger with Pharmacology University Incorporated, a global leader in the field of medical cannabis education that markets its services under the brand Pharmacology University. And more to the point, CNHC joining forces with Pharmacology University and Precision Research Institute has created one of the most complete companies in the cannabis industry. COO Elizabeth Hernandez explains the reason behind this decision. While pursuing my dream, I'd wanted to unite forces with a company in the cannabis industry. That is when I found Pharmacology University. The synergy between the two companies has been superb, and we are positioning ourselves to become the high-end authority of the cannabis research industry. Now this journey finally feels complete. Riding this new wave of inspiration, we are deeply committed to produce revenue-generating models and building shareholder value. Now the merger of CHNC, which is publicly traded on the OTC markets under the ticker symbol CHNC, provides the framework for Pharmacology University to expand its focus into cannabis clinical trials and bolstering its educational offerings. Founded in 2010, Pharmacology University offers educational products and consulting services in the U.S., Puerto Rico, Latin, and South America to train doctors, dispensary owners, growers, lawyers, and other professionals on the palliative and myriad health benefits of cannabis. Now, the company has also partnered with private accredited universities to offer an intensive master certification program in cannabis science and is now the top international provider of medical cannabis education. Now, in addition to its classroom education, Pharmacology University owns and operates Canna Law magazine, which is a digital informational piece that provides cultural enrichment to the cannabis entrepreneur. We want to be pioneers in the search for truth with actual clinical trials in regards to how cannabis can be utilized, says Pharmacology University in-house legal counsel Anne Graham. Predominantly because in the number one problem for people that are set against using cannabis as medicine, simply due to the fact that the cannabis industry has not produced sufficient medical studies. Now, the global market for medical cannabis is expected to reach more than $150 billion annually by 2027, according to a 2019 report by researchandmarkets.com. Now, the anticipated growth is driven in large part by the legalization of cannabis for medical use in Europe, as well as for the passage in the U.S. of the Hemp Farming Act of 2018, which legalized hemp, a variety of cannabis sativa species that has less than 0.3% concentration of THC. And although many companies are looking to capitalize on the industry's projected growth by opening dispensaries, cannabis farms, and manufacturing facilities, Pharmacology University sees limitless opportunities in the educational space. Says Dr. Jose Torres, the International Medical Director of Pharmacology University, the endocannabinoid system is represented in every organ and system in the body. That means that at times we have deficiencies, just like now and again, and our bodies present insufficiencies of minerals and vitamins according to the human body, could also lack endocannabinoids. Now, preliminary research indicates that the scarcity of endocannabinoids may be the root of various illnesses such as epilepsy and even certain types of cancer, he adds. By becoming a pioneer in the clinical trials to explore more than 120 cannabis molecules, the newly formed public company aims to equip healthcare professionals and others in the industry and the information and knowledge to help millions of people through the use of cannabis in medical treatments. We had a vision when we started 10 years ago, and 2021 will be our dream becoming a reality, said Katarina Osuna, the International Director of Marketing and Public Relations of Pharmacology University, Magister of Audiovisual Communications and Advertising Content for the Autónoma University of Barcelona, Spain. We look forward to being the world leader in cannabis clinical studies. China Infrastructure Construction Corporation is going to be apparently one of the leading resources for cannabis education and research. I do find that some of this seems a little too much of pumping their own tires when you consider the amount of education and research and clinical data that's come out of Israel over the last 60 to 70 years. To say that there's a US-based pharmacology university that is going to be the standard globally for cannabis education seems extremely ignorant, and I don't quite believe that they have enough, I guess, background of information to really ever be that place. But it is interesting to see which companies, obviously, again, there's lots of skepticism around how much China is involved within the cannabis space, and the reality is always very heavily. Again, for hemp production, for CBD isolate, for a lot of the products and the equipment that most operators are using, China is still heavily involved and invested within this space. And now there are Chinese-based companies focusing on becoming the preeminent research groups for cannabis. So definitely something to pay attention to. I do find, though, in general, that a lot of this type of information, when you hear that the industry does not have enough data, that's just not true anymore. There's tons of data that's out there. And speaking of which, that leads to my next two announcements, which are literally about the many data trends that are already available, as well as the ones that are continuing moving forward. So the Mental Health Commission of Canada announced funding 14 community-based research products that will explore how cannabis use affects underserved populations across the country. And each project will be receiving funding of up to $100,000 over 2 years for a total research investment of $1.4 million. Now, following the community-based research model, each community under study will lead its own project, participate in every phase of research, and benefit from positive social changes that occurs as a result of findings. We're excited to see community-based research projects across Canada that will build capacity and new knowledge, directly benefit communities, and influence public policy, said Dr. Joanna Okocha, the co-director of the Centre of Community-Based Research, or the CCBR. Collectively, these projects could create stronger, more responsive and supportive communities, especially for those people who lack power or opportunity and who are vulnerable in some way. Now, the projects will address significant gaps in research on cannabis and mental health among Indigenous, Métis, LGBTO, senior, immigrant, refugee, ethnocultural, and racialized populations, as well as all other communities who experience layers of oppression. Now, one example of this initiative is to be undertaken by the Center of Resilience and Social Development, or the CRSD. It's important to examine the link between mental health and cannabis use through social, political, and economic lenses, said CRSD project manager Aber Abdul, who will be looking at how these factors intercede with the IRER populations while striving to bolster community engagement and empower young people. Now, 6 of these projects will include initial examinations of cannabis use on mental health in Métis and First Nations communities, some of the first Indigenous-led research of its kind. These 6 projects offer an opportunity for First Nations and Métis to invest in research that honors their own knowledge and culture and the foundation of the worldviews, said Dr. Carol Hopkins, the executive director of the Thunderbird Partner Foundation. That's a step in the right direction towards the decolonization of Indigenous knowledges. Now, for Krista Benz, the director of the MHCC's Mental Health and Substance Use team, this investment marks an exciting step towards more inclusive research. No one is better equipped to explore the relationship between cannabis and mental health in marginalized communities than the people from those communities, and we're all experts in our own right. So 6 of the 14 funded projects will be Indigenous-led, and this research will be the first to examine cannabis use in mental health in Métis communities, and the research will be among the first Indigenous-led examinations of cannabis use and mental health. So this one research project, obviously focusing on marginalized communities. I do really like that it's focusing on Indigenous and Métis cultural impacts and medical use of cannabis and how this impacts both socially as well as medically. And I do think that these are the research projects that do need to be pushed forward. I also think that obviously there is a lot of indigenous knowledge surrounding the cannabis as a use of medicine and as a use as a social binder that has been largely ignored. And this is the type of sort of whitewash knowledge that unfortunately we have a lot today within this industry, which is there's a lot of common knowledge about cannabis. There's a lot of knowledge from growers. There's a lot of knowledge from indigenous peoples around the world who have used cannabis both traditionally and medicinally for a very, very long time. And we ignore a lot of that as data and treat it as anecdotal when the reality is that information is as concrete as any other research projects are going to be about there, as it's been tested and tried for thousands of years. So I do find that, again, similar to what I was discussing with CHNC, having any of these research groups or having anyone within this industry saying that there isn't enough information and that people still have a weak understanding of what this plant can be for benefits for human health or for human social concepts or for mental health or for actual health seems very outdated and ridiculous still. I do like that they're focusing on how they can better help these communities, and hopefully it does benefit these underserved populations. But in general, again, this focus on we need more data is, if you're not convinced by now for smoking weed or that the benefits of cannabis in some way for your life, and that there's not enough data out there to provide that for you, then there will never be enough data, because there's massive amounts of populations that are smoking weed every day. There's tons of anecdotal evidence of no harm that can be caused about this. And this leads to the last research project of the day, which is probably something that I think is very much the underrated element of the benefits of cannabis. So this research led by Philip Lucas, a graduate researcher at the University of Victoria and VP Global Patient Research at Access of Tilray, announced that his research has found that medical cannabis use is associated with self-reported reductions and even discontinuation of alcohol use among authorized Canadian patients. Now, the results stem from the Canadian Cannabis Patient Survey of 2019, a large national cross-sectional survey that gathered comprehensive information on patient demographics, patients of cannabis use, and self-reported use of prescription drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and illicit drugs, before and after medical cannabis initiation from 2102 Canada. Medical cannabis patients registered with Tilray, a global pioneer in medical cannabis research and production. Now, the results of the CCPS 2019 add to a growing body of evidence that medical cannabis use is often associated with reductions in the use of other substances, including alcohol, opioids, tobacco, and illicit drugs, said Lucas. Since alcohol is the most prevalent recreational substance in the world, and its use results in significant rates of criminality, morbidity, mortality, these findings may result in improved health outcomes for medical cannabis patients, as well as overall improvements in public health and safety. Now, these results were recently published in the International Journal of Drug Policy in a paper titled Reductions in Alcohol Use Following Medical Cannabis Initiation, results from a large cross-sectional survey of medical cannabis patients in Canada, co-authored by Susan Boyd from the University of Victoria, MJ Malloy, the University of BC, and Zach Walsh, the University of BC Okanagan. Overall, 973 survey participants reported past or concurrent alcohol use, with 419 or 44% reporting decreases in alcohol use frequency over 30 days, 34% decreasing the number of standard drinks that they had per week, and 76 or 8% reporting no alcohol use at all in the 30 days prior to the survey. Now, being younger than 55 years and reporting higher rates of alcohol use prior to initiating medical cannabis use were both associated with greater odds of reducing alcohol use, and having an intention to use medical cannabis to reduce alcohol consumption was associated with significantly greater odds of both reducing and ceasing alcohol use altogether. And this is another one of these loose facts within the cannabis space where, again, there's always a demand for more data. And really the demand for more data seems to be stemmed from a series of groups who do not like the idea of medical cannabis dipping into their pool. And that would be the pool of alcohol, the pool of tobacco, and the pool of opioids. You can listen to millions of conferences, and I've attended many a cannabis conference where the discussion was how cannabis can best decrease opioid use, decrease alcoholism, and decrease other addictive substance use. This has been discussed thousands of times. There are thousands of different research projects that have gone into depth about this, proven this, or at least had significant data to assert these claims. And again, there is the massive amount of anecdotal evidence that's out there. Again, there's tons of self-reported people who have switched from heavy alcohol use to cannabis. I can even attest to that personally myself, and it's the reason that I think cannabis is definitely the drug of choice for almost everybody. Because the majority of people who are out there today, especially within North America, are suffering heavily from alcoholism, and it's something that goes unreported and undiscussed on a daily basis, is exactly how much alcoholism is destroying society as a whole. This is the majority of your petty crimes. This is the majority of your first aid responses. This is the majority of fights at bars. This is the majority of liver failure and organ failure, as well as, again, just straight up people dying from alcohol poisoning all the time. And again, there's a high addiction level. There's also a really difficulty in removing yourself from alcohol because of the addiction level and the fact that someone who's a heavy alcoholic, if they do not have some sort of other drug therapy to get them off of alcohol, it's almost impossible for them to quit drinking cold turkey without them actually dying. Again, tons of anecdotal and tons of actual data that's out there that shows that through cannabis use, this death sentence, but from basically stopping drinking, can be avoided and reduced. The risks associated with alcoholism can be reduced, and the actual need to drink can be reduced heavily. And I think that that is, again, enough evidence that needs to be out there for many people to just understand that cannabis should be fully endorsed just the same way alcohol is, if not more so, when you consider, for myself, I worked in the restaurant industry for 10 years, where alcoholism is not only ubiquitous with the culture, it's encouraged constantly. That is the bonding moment for almost every chef or server or manager or everyone within that industry, is to have drinks after work. This leads to heavy alcoholism. Many chefs suffer from gout. Many of them commit suicide. Many of them suffer from depression. Many of them are just wildly unhealthy because of the industry that they're in that constantly promotes alcoholism on a daily basis. And yet that same industry does not endorse the use of cannabis. People can be fired from their jobs for even smoking weed. The preposterousness of that it's insane. And I do hope that there's going to be, over the next few years, an understanding from the average person to the medically knowledgeable person that the dangers surrounding cannabis are basically a zero when compared with all of the other substances, even sugar, even caffeine, that people take on a daily basis. And we do not discuss these problems at all. Sorry for my long rant there at the end. That's all for today's podcast. And once again, today's podcast was sponsored by Cannabis Swiss Corporation, trading on the OTC as CSUI, a fully licensed cannabis cultivation and distribution company in Switzerland for recreational tobacco products and medical CBD oils. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated's ZM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.